What happens when the world you know fades into a blur? What if your eyes betray you in a time where survival depended on every sense? For the medieval elderly, roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, vision loss was not just an inconvenience, it was a grim reality. Number 1. Economic ruin and absolute poverty. Life in the medieval world was built on labor. Most people lived in rural areas, toiling on the land, and their very existence was tied to their ability to work. A person's worth, their survival, and their family's well-being often depended on their physical capacity. When vision began to fail in old age, a person's ability to contribute to the economic system crumbled. This was not a gradual decline with social safety nets to catch them. This was a sudden, devastating plunge into potential destitution. Consider a peasant farmer, bent by decades of backbreaking work in the fields. His days were spent tilling the soil, sowing seeds, harvesting crops, and tending to livestock. Every task, from separating wheat from chaff to guiding a plow, required keen eyesight. As cataracts clouded his vision, the familiar rows of grain would blur into an indistinct mass. He might mistake weeds for young crops, or stumble over roots he could no longer see. The sharp edge of his scythe, once a tool of efficiency, became a weapon of accidental harm. His output would decrease, his movements would slow, and soon he would become a liability rather than an asset to the lord's estate or his own family. In a system where rent was often paid in labor or a share of the harvest, a blind farmer could not meet his obligations. The lord of the manor had little sympathy for a diminished worker. Loyalty and tradition were powerful forces, but the practicalities of survival often outweighed them. If the farmer could no longer contribute, he risked losing his small plot of land, the very foundation of his family's livelihood. His family, perhaps already living on the edge of subsistence, would then face a crushing burden. They would have to feed an extra mouth, and without the contribution of the elder, their own ability to survive would be severely compromised. Craftsmen and artisans faced a similar fate. A weaver needed precise vision to thread the loom and create intricate patterns. A potter relied on his eyes to shape clay perfectly and to inspect his wares for imperfections. A shoemaker had to see tiny stitches and discern different types of leather. A blacksmith, though working with brute force, still needed to see the glowing metal and strike it accurately. Vision loss meant an immediate end to their trade. Their hands, though skilled by years of practice, were useless without the guiding eye. Their tools, once extensions of their will, became silent and heavy. No customers would buy crooked pots, uneven cloth, or poorly made shoes. Their income, once a reliable stream, would dry up instantly. For women, vision was equally critical for their daily tasks. Spinning wool into yarn, weaving cloth for garments, mending clothes, preparing food over an open fire, and even gathering herbs or berries, all required sight. A woman losing her vision could no longer contribute to the household economy in these essential ways. Her inability to mend clothes meant her family's garments would wear out faster, leading to discomfort and vulnerability. Her inability to prepare food safely over the fire could lead to burns or undercooked meals. Her role as a caretaker and producer was severely hampered. There was no pension system, no disability benefits, no organized welfare state. Charity existed often through the church or wealthy patrons, but it was limited and uncertain. Monasteries might offer shelter and food to a few truly destitute individuals, but they could not accommodate everyone. The elderly blind were often left to the mercy of their families. If a family was large and prosperous, they might be able to support an elderly blind parent or grandparent, though it would always be a strain. In smaller, poorer families, The choice was often stark. Either everyone suffered from lack of resources, or the elder was left to beg on the streets or face starvation. Historical records sometimes mention individuals who became beggars. These were often people who had lost their ability to work due to infirmity or age, and vision loss was a prime cause. They would sit by church doors, at market entrances, or on busy roads, holding out a hand for alms. Their dignity, if they had any left, was stripped away. They became dependent on the fleeting generosity of strangers. This was a profoundly lonely existence, often ending in a slow decline from malnutrition, exposure, and untreated ailments. The medieval world was unforgiving to those who could not contribute. Vision loss was not just a personal affliction. It was an economic death sentence for many. Number 2. Isolation and mental anguish. Life in the medieval era was deeply communal, characterized by close-knit villages and families. Social interactions were constant, driven by shared labor, religious rituals, and oral storytelling. When an elderly person lost their vision, this vibrant tapestry of connection began to unravel, leading to profound isolation and a heavy toll on their mental well-being. The world, once full of familiar faces and comforting sights, slowly faded into an indistinct void, and with it, their place within it. Think about the central role of gatherings. Villagers would meet in the church for services, a place where murals, stained glass, and illuminated manuscripts provided visual anchors for faith. A blind person could hear the sermons, but the visual grandeur and the ability to follow along with the priest's movements, or even recognize fellow worshippers, would be lost. Their participation would become passive, detached. Feast days and celebrations were vibrant affairs, filled with colorful banners, lively dances, and dramatic performances. A blind elder could hear the music and the laughter, but they could not see the joy on faces, the intricate steps of the dancers, or the spectacle of a traveling jongleur. They were present in body, but absent in visual experience, creating a profound sense of removal. Storytelling was another cornerstone of medieval social life. People gathered around hearths in the long winter evenings, sharing tales of local heroes, ancient myths, and news from afar. While a blind person could listen to these stories, the lack of visual cues in conversation, a nod, a smile, a shared glance, would diminish the richness of the interaction. They could not observe the reactions of others, the subtle shifts in expression that convey so much unspoken meaning. This made genuine connection difficult to maintain. Over time, others might even forget to include them, assuming they could not participate fully, or simply finding it less engaging to interact with someone who could not respond to visual cues. Work was often a communal activity. Women spun and wove together, gossiping and sharing news. Men toiled in the fields, engaging in conversations and banter. When vision loss prevented an elder from participating in these collective tasks, they were physically removed from the social fabric. They could not join in the shared laughter, the quiet camaraderie that comes from working side by side. Their days became long, silent stretches, broken only by the sounds of a bustling household that they could no longer fully engage with. The rhythm of communal life passed them by. Personal hygiene and appearance, though not as emphasized as today, still played a role in social acceptance. A blind person might struggle to maintain their cleanliness, to ensure their clothes were tidy, or to prevent food stains. These small difficulties could lead to others shying away, adding another layer to their isolation. Dependence on others for basic needs could also foster resentment, or at best pity, rather than genuine connection. The loss of literacy, for the few who possessed it, was another crushing blow. Though books were rare and expensive, monastic scribes and some wealthy individuals did engage with written texts. A blind scholar or merchant could no longer read, severing a vital link to knowledge, contemplation, and personal enjoyment. The world of ideas, already limited by access, would shrink further for them. They could no longer study illuminated manuscripts, write letters, or record their thoughts. Their intellectual life, if they had one, would be severely curtailed. The psychological impact of this escalating isolation was immense. Loneliness can fester into deep depression. Without the ability to see the faces of loved ones, to witness the changing seasons, or to engage with the beauty of their surroundings, life could become a monotonous struggle. There was no concept of mental health support, no therapists or counselors. Such afflictions were often attributed to spiritual failings or simply accepted as the burden of old age. The blind elder might feel like a burden, a useless appendage to their family and community. This feeling of worthlessness, combined with the sensory deprivation, could lead to a profound sense of hopelessness. They lived within their own darkness, separate from the visible world, haunted by the memories of what they once saw, and facing a future without light or meaningful connection. Number 3. Increased danger and accidents. The medieval world was a place of constant physical hazards, even for those with perfect vision. There were no streetlights, no paved roads in most places, no safety regulations, and open flames were everywhere. For an elderly person losing their vision, this environment transformed from merely challenging to outright terrifying, dramatically increasing their risk of severe injury, disfigurement, or even death. Every step outside their immediate familiar dwelling was a journey fraught with peril. Consider the layout of a typical medieval village or town. Paths were often uneven, muddy tracks, churned up by cartwheels and livestock. Potholes and ruts were common, and sharp stones or fallen branches lay hidden beneath the grime. There were no sidewalks or designated pedestrian zones. People walked amidst animals, chickens, pigs, dogs, and even larger livestock, like cows and horses, which could move unpredictably or kick without warning. A blind person, unable to see these obstacles, would trip and fall frequently. A simple fall could lead to a broken bone, a concussion, or a debilitating sprain. In an era without modern medical care, a broken leg could become infected, leading to gangrene and amputation, or simply immobility and death. Inside the home, dangers were just as prevalent. Most houses were small, dark, and often smoky from the central hearth. Fires were the primary source of heat, light, and cooking. Open flames were everywhere, in the fireplace, from tallow candles, or even from crude oil lamps. A blind person could easily stumble into a firebrush against a hot pot or knock over a burning lamp. Severe burns were excruciating and often fatal due to infection. The very air was often filled with smoke, stinging eyes and lungs, a constant reminder of the ever-present danger. Tools and implements were commonplace. Farmers had scythes, hoes, and axes. Craftsmen had saws, knives, and hammers. These were not stored safely in cabinets, but often left within easy reach. A blind person reaching for something or simply moving through their home could easily cut themselves, impale a limb, or strike their head on a forgotten tool. A deep wound, especially one sustained in unhygienic conditions, would quickly become infected, leading to agonizing pain, fever, and a high likelihood of death. Beyond the immediate home and village, the landscape was even more perilous. Forests surrounded many settlements, home to wild animals like wolves and bears. Rivers and streams had no bridges or railings. Wells were often uncovered. A blind person venturing out alone, even for a short distance, could easily become disoriented, fall into a ditch, drown in a river, or become prey for an animal. The journey to the nearest market or church, once a routine trip, became an insurmountable obstacle, confining them to the small, shrinking world they could navigate by touch and memory. Nightfall brought an entirely new level of terror. Without any form of public lighting, the darkness was absolute, broken only by the flickering glow of a distant fire or the pale light of the moon. This darkness, for a blind person, was their perpetual reality. They could not distinguish friend from foe, avoid a lurking shadow, or even find their way back to their own door if they strayed. The fear of being lost, of encountering a stranger, or of falling into an unseen pit would be constant. The threat of fire was not confined to the home. Medieval towns, with their tightly packed wooden buildings and thatched roofs, were prone to devastating fires. A blind person trapped in a burning building would have virtually no chance of escape. They could not see the flames, navigate the smoke-filled corridors, or find an exit. They were utterly dependent on others to guide them to safety, a precarious reliance in a panicked situation. Without the ability to see, the world became a minefield of potential dangers. Every sound, every change in temperature, every new smell would be interpreted with a heightened sense of anxiety. The loss of vision meant a loss of autonomy and a dramatic increase in vulnerability, making every moment of life a tense negotiation with a dangerous and unforgiving environment. Number 4. Impact on daily chores and basic survival. Life in the medieval period was a constant grind of physical labor, with every member of a household expected to contribute to its survival. From dawn to dusk, tasks were abundant, and success in these chores directly impacted the family's ability to eat, stay warm, and remain healthy. For an elderly person suffering from vision loss, the very fabric of their daily existence, their ability to perform the essential chores that kept them alive, unraveled completely. They were rendered profoundly incapable of meeting their most basic needs. Consider the preparation of food. Gathering firewood was a daily necessity, requiring the ability to see branches on the ground, identify types of wood, and navigate uneven terrain. A blind person could not safely chop wood with an axe, a task that required precision and strength, let alone see where the axe was going. Cooking itself was fraught with danger. Medieval kitchens typically featured open hearths or large cauldrons suspended over fires. A blind person trying to stir a pot, add ingredients, or simply move around the cooking area risked severe burns, knocking over boiling liquids or accidentally setting their clothes alight. Distinguishing different types of food, preparing vegetables, or even pouring water from a pitcher became challenging, often messy and dangerous. The simple act of finding and fetching water from a well or stream, especially in low light or at night, was a dangerous undertaking. Maintaining the home was another critical set of chores. Sweeping, cleaning, and tidying were important for hygiene, especially in homes shared with animals or where dirt floors were common. A blind person could not effectively sweep or clean missing debris and potentially creating more hazards. Mending clothes was a constant chore given the durability and cost of fabric. A blind person could not thread a needle, sew a tear, or patch a worn garment. This meant that clothes would wear out faster, exposing the family to the elements and potentially leading to illness. Spinning wool or flax into yarn, a ubiquitous task for women, was impossible without sight, as it required careful manipulation of fibers and observation of the forming thread. Weaving, even more complex, was entirely out of the question. Animal husbandry was a primary source of sustenance for many. Seeding chickens, milking cows, or tending to pigs required keen observation. A blind person could not safely navigate a livestock pen, distinguish individual animals, or ensure they were properly fed and watered. Milking a cow, An act that demands precision and gentleness was dangerous without being able to see the udder or the collecting bucket. Gathering eggs from nests, often hidden in dark corners, became an impossible hunt. Even collecting fuel, like dried dung for fires, was a chore that needed sight to identify and gather the necessary material in agricultural settings. The impact was devastating. Plowing, planting seeds in straight rows, weeding out undesirable plants, and harvesting crops all relied on sight. A blind person could not participate in these vital activities. They could not distinguish ripe grains from unripe, or weeds from valuable plants. Their inability to perform these tasks meant a direct reduction in the family's food supply. They could not even walk through the fields without damaging crops or getting lost. Even simple tasks like lighting a candle or managing a fire became difficult. Without sight, determining the size of a flame, knowing when to add more fuel or ensuring it was safely contained, was a constant challenge. This meant relying on others for these essential warmth and light provisions, further eroding their independence. The inability to perform these basic, everyday chores meant a profound loss of self-sufficiency. A blind elder could no longer contribute to the household economy, becoming instead a consumer of resources without being able to replenish them. This often led to feelings of helplessness and profound dependence on others, a crushing burden in a world where every hand was needed for survival. Their inability to participate in the physical work of survival meant that their very existence became a direct drain on the often meager resources of their family, making them a significant liability rather than a valued elder. Number 5. Loss of independence and social status. In medieval society, a person's worth and their place within the community were intricately linked to their ability to contribute. Physical labor, skill, and active participation were the cornerstones of social standing. For the elderly, vision loss was not merely a physical affliction. It was a profound stripping away of their independence and a precipitous decline in their social status. They went from active, respected members of the community to dependent individuals, often pitied or even scorned. Think of an elder who was once a respected figure, perhaps a village headman, a skilled craftsman, or a wise woman known for her knowledge of herbs and healing. Their opinions were sought, their advice valued. When their vision began to fail, their ability to perform the duties associated with their status would diminish. A headman could no longer preside over meetings with authority, seeing the expressions of his constituents. A craftsman could no longer produce the quality goods that earned him respect. A wise woman might struggle to identify plants or prepare remedies accurately, losing the trust of those who relied on her. This loss of capability directly translated into a loss of influence and respect. Other members of the community would step forward to fill the void, and the elder would be gently, or not so gently, pushed aside. Personal autonomy, a cherished aspect of adult life, vanished with vision loss. The freedom to move independently, to visit neighbors, to go to the market, or even to attend church services without assistance was gone. Every outing required a guide, a child, a spouse, or a compassionate neighbor. This constant reliance was not just inconvenient, it was humiliating. An adult who had spent a lifetime making their own decisions and charting their own course was suddenly reduced to a state of childlike dependence. They could not choose where to go, when to go, or what to do without external help. This helplessness was a daily reminder of their diminished state. For women, vision loss impacted their ability to manage a household, a role that brought them considerable influence and respect within the family structure. A medieval woman was responsible for feeding her family, making and mending clothes, and caring for children without sight. These tasks became impossible or dangerous. Her ability to oversee the domestic realm, which was her sphere of authority, would be severely curtailed. Her husband or children would have to take over her duties, changing the power dynamics within the family and diminishing her standing as the mistress of the house. The concept of elderly wisdom was certainly present in medieval society. Older individuals were respected for their experience and knowledge of traditions. However, this wisdom was often communicated through storytelling and advice, which could be challenging if the elder became withdrawn due to their blindness, or if their interactions became difficult due to their inability to pick up on social cues. While their knowledge might still be valued, their practical utility and active participation in community life would be greatly reduced. This could lead to them being honored but simultaneously ignored or sidelined, respected in name but not in practice. Stigma also played a role. While blindness was a visible disability, often associated with a natural progression of age, it could also be viewed as a punishment from God for sins or a sign of misfortune. This perception, whether overt or subtle, added to the emotional burden of the blind elder. They might feel marginalized, not just by their physical limitations, but by a perceived negative spiritual taint. This could lead to self-isolation, as they might feel ashamed or unworthy. Ultimately, the loss of vision meant a profound transformation, from an active, contributing member of society to a dependent, often housebound individual. Their world shrank to the confines of their immediate dwelling, and their interactions dwindled. The lively gossip by the well, the shared laughter in the fields, the earnest discussions in the church, all of these everyday social connections became difficult to maintain. Their place in the social hierarchy, once defined by their abilities, was now defined by their limitations. This change was not just physical. It was a deep psychological blow that stripped them of their identity and worth in the eyes of their community, and often in their own eyes as well. Number 6. No help from healers. The medieval period was a time of limited scientific understanding, especially regarding the intricate workings of the human body. When it came to vision loss in old age, the prevailing beliefs, medical practices, and available treatments offered virtually no hope of recovery. For the elderly whose sight began to dim, the healers of the time, whether barber surgeons, monastic physicians, or folk practitioners, could offer little more than ineffective remedies, dangerous interventions, or simple resignation. There was no true help for vision loss. The dominant medical theory was the humoral system, which posited that the body was governed by 4 primary fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness, including vision problems, was believed to result from an imbalance of these humors. The eye itself was often considered a lens, or an organ that merely transmitted images rather than a complex structure with its own specific diseases. Concepts like cataracts, glaucoma, or macular degeneration as we understand them today were completely unknown. Vision loss was simply attributed to suffusion, a film over the eye, or to the general drying out and weakening of the body with age. Treatments derived from this humoral understanding were often bizarre and ineffective. Bloodletting was a common practice, believed to rebalance the humors. A patient with failing eyesight might have blood drawn from a vein, with the hope that this would somehow clear the eyes. Leeching was also used, applying live leeches to the skin to draw out bad blood. These practices, while not directly harmful to the eye, weakened the already frail elderly and did nothing to restore vision. Herbal remedies were plentiful, but their efficacy for age-related vision loss was nil. Poultices made from various plants might be applied to the eyes, or concoctions brewed for internal consumption. Some herbs were believed to strengthen the eyes, while others were thought to cleanse them. Eye washes made from things like rainwater, honey, or even urine were sometimes prescribed based on folk beliefs rather than anatomical understanding. These preparations might cause irritation or infection, but they certainly would not halt the progression of cataracts or restore lost retinal function. Monastic infirmaries run by monks who preserve some ancient medical texts might offer a slightly more systematic approach, but their knowledge of eye conditions was still rudimentary. Their practices were often a mix of herbalism, prayer, and basic hygiene. They might recommend fasting, specific diets, or prolonged rest, all aimed at restoring general health in the hope it would also affect the eyes. However, their understanding of the eye's anatomy was limited to what they gleaned from classical texts, which were themselves full of errors and lacked modern insight. The most dangerous, and perhaps the only direct, intervention attempted for vision loss was couching. This procedure was primarily for cataracts, though the medieval practitioners did not understand the true nature of cataracts. They believed the clouding of the lens was a film or skin that needed to be pushed aside. A couching specialist, often an itinerant and unschooled practitioner rather than a formally trained physician, would use a sharp needle, often unsterilized, to literally push the clouded lens out of the patient's line of sight, typically pushing it downwards into the vitreous humor. This procedure was incredibly risky. Even if successful in moving the lens, the patient would often suffer from immediate and severe complications. Infection was almost guaranteed, leading to excruciating pain, inflammation, and often total blindness. Hemorrhage inside the eye, retinal detachment, or damage to other delicate eye structures were common outcomes. Even if the patient gained some crude light perception, their vision would be blurry and distorted without a functional lens, and they would be highly susceptible to further complications. For most, couching ended in tragedy, plunging them into permanent, painful darkness. Eyeglasses, while invented in the late 13th century, were extremely rare, expensive, and largely inaccessible to the common elderly person, especially in rural areas. They were custom-made, available only to the very wealthy, and designed primarily for presbyopia, farsightedness for reading, not for severe conditions like cataracts or glaucoma. They offered no solution for most forms of age-related vision loss. Ultimately, when an elderly person in the medieval period began to lose their vision, they faced a stark and terrifying reality. There were no cures, no effective treatments, and no safe medical interventions. The healers could offer only rituals, ineffective concoctions, or dangerous procedures that often hastened total blindness and led to agonizing pain. The only certainty was that the darkness would deepen, and no one could stop it. They were left to face their fading sight alone, resigned to a future shrouded in an irreversible and expanding gloom.